From revenue collection of 200 billion in 2002 to over 600 billion in 2012, a boom in internet connectivity. 18 million Kenyans having access to financial services in 2012 compared to less than a million when he took office 10 years before. Mwai Kibaki's is a decorated economic legacy. From interest rates to tax collection, infrastructure and ICT, roaring reviews have been offered. Tonight we interrogate the legacy through the men who worked with the third president of the Republic of Kenya. On the program tonight, let me introduce my guests one more time, our eminent panel, Mugo Kibati, who was a former Director General of the Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat under President Kibaki, now CEO Telkom Kenya. Also tonight here on Newsnight, we've got Dr. Bitange Ndemo, who served as PS for Information Technology and recently appointed to be Kenya's ambassador to Belgium. Also joining the panel, Michael Waweru, the man who was at the helm of the Kenya Revenue Authority. Last but not least, Dr. James Mwangi, the CEO of Equity Group. All of them are here live with me this evening, and we invite your views. The hashtag is Newsnight at Citizen TV Kenya, at Yvonne Okwara. If you wish to send us a text message, the number is 22422. Gentlemen, good evening. I am honored to be in the midst of such an eminent panel this evening. Thank you for making the time for us here on Citizen Television. Dr. Ndemo, may I begin with you? Because I think for many of us who are living in the internet age and this connectivity and, fiber connections, perhaps many of us don't understand, the origin of that. And that was under, your tenure, under the leadership and guidance of President Mwai Kibaki. Could you speak to us about that? I know, we'll get into some interesting quotes about what that moment was like, but speak to us about the president's plan, both for internet connectivity, but also for creating, the Open Data Initiative was also a big one. So tell us about what the president's idea was at the time.
Thank you. But first, let me also wish the family, wish to tell them that they are not grieving alone. The whole country is united in grieving this great man. And personally, I feel privileged having worked under him to see how he made decisions. In a very brief summary, is that the late former president was an open market economist, and he understood where there was market failure and they would say the government should intervene. Without his direct intervention, especially on the undersea cable, which lowered the cost of broadband, we would not be where we are. He simply said the private sector cannot invest where they cannot see profits. And he said, let's look for money. We do the first cable. And he was correct. Mugo just launched the 6th cable. So the private sector doesn't open up a country. This is the first thing, the first decision he made. The second major decision he made in the telecom sector was Telkom Kenya was hemorrhaging. I mean, people were terminating calls outside the system. And he said the best thing you people can do is to liberalize the sector, because we used to have, they used to own what is called the international gateway. And that is where people used to steal money from the telecom sector. And it was very contentious and very, very risky. But he said, that is why I've hired you. You go and liberalize this thing. That also changed, brought the prices down to the extent that today we can talk about broadband available to most people in the country. I could say more, but let me stop here and then.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting point, because the next one I think would go to you, Mugo. I was going to ask you about Vision 2030, but perhaps just your reflections now that you are heading a telco in the country. So what would you remember him for in the industry in which you are now?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And I want to echo Professor Ndemo's sympathies and condolences to the family. He mentioned the 6th cable, which we just launched, and he was a guest at our launch in Mombasa, in Nyali, just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. This cable actually has a capacity of all the other 5 combined. But the legacy there is that way back, 13, 14 years ago, when the first cable was laid, it was the confidence that the PS, the minister then, had in themselves and the freedom to operate, that they took a very bold step to create one of the first public-private partnerships in creating teams to sort of propel or to push the rest of Africa, which had the EC cable that had slowed down. And President Kibaki gave them the room to do that. And because of that decision, and when we say he laid the foundations, that's a prime example, because 13 years later, we're laying the sixth cable that is connecting this country to Europe, to China, to Pakistan, and to the far-flung corners of this world.
Yeah. Let's, while I'm still with you, talk about, Vision 2030 for a moment. You were a man at the helm of that, and that was, President Kibaki's, big legacy, if you like, Vision 2030. We remember the launch, was it in 2006?
2008.
2008. It was all about transforming the agriculture sector. And President Kibaki termed it at the time as the last major effort in eradicating poverty, illiteracy, and disease, which was a promise that was made at independence. How revolutionary was this? And what are your reflections now as to the progress of Vision 2030? There are some that say, not so much, and we've steered in a different direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start by saying that what was remarkable wasn't just the notion of the concept of Vision 2030, but it was even how he went about it. Sitting right across me here is Dr. James Mwangi, who was chairman of the Vision Delivery Board, and I was the Director General of Vision Delivery Secretariat. The fact that he thought that he wanted to go outside government, pick men like James Mwangi and myself, that in itself was quite revolutionary at that particular point in time. And the reason he did that was because President Kibaki never did anything merely to do something. Everything he did had a particular purpose, and he was keen to see that the steps and measures taken to undertake a particular effort or initiative would see that effort come into fruition. Now, you talk about 13 years down the road, people say what's happened. Well, Vision 2030 is alive and well. I have said before that a lot of the initiatives that you see taking place today have their foundations, not just in Vision 2030, but actually in the first 5 years of President Kibaki's term, when he had the economic growth and recovery strategy, which was a precursor to Vision 2030. That was a typical 5-year plan, but focused on growth. In fact, he did not want to hear about poverty reduction, which was the original plan. He wanted it changed to growth and wealth creation. And because of the success of what was in short called ERS, a plan was mooted. He also formed the National Economic and Social Council. Again, methodology. Right. He had methodology. He was a systems man. So he created the National Economic and Social Council that brought together private sector, academia, cabinet, international experts, the very top, from countries like Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, China, Japan, the UK, sitting quarterly for 3 days with senior government and private sector Kenyan leaders. And from there was mooted Vision 2030. And Vision 2030 was a realization that in order to transform this country, and we're required to transform this country in order to make sure that by the year 2030, every Kenyan alive has a prosperous and decent life. That was his dream. It was always his dream, that Kenyans, citizens, have a decent life. He realized that you have to transform the country, and you can't transform the country in 5 years. You need some of the infrastructure projects, some of the policy initiatives, including governance. The political pillar of Vision 2030 was about governance, and the biggest flagship was the Constitution. The infrastructure projects you see today, the roads projects, rail, ports, airports, we have airports in several counties in this country today, arose from that realization that you needed a holistic vision that covered not just the economic, but also the social and political aspects of our life, and what we call the enablers. The infrastructure is an enabler, but also public service, delivery of public service, performance management in public service. So he was very holistic in his approach. And so today, when you hear about the big four, healthcare is another social pillar. Affordable housing is another social pillar. Food security, agriculture and economic pillar, which is a first sector in the economic pillar is geared towards food security, manufacturing. That is where jobs will be created, again, in the economic pillar of Vision 2030. So it is alive and well, 13 years later.
Alive and well. Sadly, President Kibaki is not, today, and which is why we would want to hear from you, Michael. We'll get into, the taxation policy and the regime in a moment. But for someone who worked very closely with him, what are your reflections of him? Tell us what sort of person he was from your perspective.
Thank you, Yvonne. And let me take this opportunity to wish the family of the former president, the late President Kibaki, condolences for his passing. I met the late president many years ago, 1979, when I was a junior in the firm of Ernst & Young. And then when I became a manager in the firm of Ernst & Young, then called Pano Bellhouse Mwangi in Nyeri, he was my client, and he would come to my office, and we would sit there and discuss his business and then discuss matters national. He struck me as a very humble person, very well informed, and somebody who you could discuss anything. In fact, as a young person, I was well read, I would say, but there is no topic I would touch on that he wasn't aware of. So he was very, very well informed. We would meet at the golf course, at Nyeri Golf Course, where I started playing golf. Mm-hmm. We didn't play together many times, but we would sit at the 19th hole together. And let me say, Mwai Kibaki, in terms of knowledge, in terms of friendship, he is a very friendly person. He was a very friendly person. He was very knowledgeable, and even caddies and everybody worked very closely with him.
What were those conversations like at the 19th hole? We
would discuss politics. He would never discuss matters to do with the cabinet decisions, but we would discuss politics of Kenya, we would discuss international matters, we would discuss economics, we would discuss, I mean, as an accountant, I was well versed on the development in the accounting world, where the new standards in accounting, but he was aware. He already knew, and he had an opinion. And therefore, I think he was very, very well read. I think he spent a lot of his time reading current affairs. Okay,
Dr. James, I'm coming to you in a moment. I just want to understand, from being your client when you were at Ernst & Young to being your boss as President of the Republic of Kenya, and you are now heading KRA, no doubt an important body in terms of collecting revenue, because that is what would enable him to do all of the things that are being said here. Was there a change in that relationship? What was he then like as your boss?
Let me say something. When I took off from John Munge, he showed me a telephone. He told me, if this phone ever rings, wherever you are, just come and pick it, because the president will be giving instructions on it. So me, I never touched that phone. I looked at it, I waited for it to ring. It never rang, even a single day. So one day, a friend of mine visited me, and I told him the story of the phone. He said, have you checked whether it is still working? And he lifted it, and it had been disconnected. Mwai Kibaki never interfered with, he appointed you, he let you do the job the best way he knew how. You would expect that you would, once in a while, you'd report to him through the minister and the PS, but he would know what's going on. But he would never, ever tell you, do this. He would never interfere with the way you did your work. If you did well and succeeded, you are well. Of course, if you failed and were to be removed, he would not interfere. He would leave you.
Okay, interesting insights. Dr. James, these three gentlemen worked for the president. You were in the banking sector. What do you remember him for? Tell us a little bit about interactions that you may have had with him.
Thank you very much. And I join my colleagues here in wishing Kenyans well as we mourn President Kibaki, but also more so celebrating the legacy he has left behind. I served President Kibaki as chairman of Vision 2030, but initially on the technical team that crafted Vision 2030. And we did that for 3 years. When he completed and took it to him, he said, what do Kenyans say about it? And we had no answer.
And for the next 3 years, we were consulting Kenyans to have answers on what they said about it. And then we incorporated the sentiments of the Kenyans. And so on the 5th year, we presented it to him. And unfortunately, then he said, James, do you mind sharing the Vision 2030 Delivery Board? We had no excuse. We had believed in the story. We had crafted it. And from there on, every last Friday of the month, we assembled together at the Kenya School of Government and deliberated. And looking back, like everybody has said, we were given a free hand to allocate resources, to prioritize the project, and to really advise the government and hold the accounting officers accountable for delivery. We used to make measurements on monthly basis and report to him on who had delivered. And it was not for us to make judgment, but for us was to deliver data to him on what was the expected and what. And then on every 5 years, do the 5-year mid-term plans on what we had delivered. And essentially looking back, President Kibaki inherited Kenya when the economy, the size of the economy, was only 1.3 trillion.
Yes.
He left it when it was 3.5 trillion. Had grown.
Triple.
But looking back, to me, I remember him for creating a foundation upon which the economy has continued to grow. The economy grew 3 times during his term, almost 4 times. But today, the economy has grown 10 times, tenfold. It has moved from 4.5 trillion to nearly 11 trillion shillings. So the ability to build, as Mugo said, structures. This was a systems person. Yeah. That systems, that structure is what has continued to make the economy to be what it is. It proved to be very resilient during the COVID period. It has bounced back very, very heavily, and it was simply because the fundamentals are light. So to me, that is what. But the most striking thing is the ability to see the role of the private sector in sustaining an economy. All along we felt before that the economy could be built by government. Government creates an enabling environment, and economies are built by the private sector. And that is why the Kenyan economy has become sustainable, and we can see it scale itself simply because it was anchored on the private sector. And to make the private sector work, what he really focused on was microeconomic environment. How is inflation? How is the exchange rate? And how is interest rate? He only focused on 3 prices and then left the markets to operate. So essentially, we saw what happened to the stock exchange because of that. We saw what happened to the private sector. The rest is history. We have a much stronger economy, and all of us can say, yeah, built in just the last 20 years.
And, you know, when you talk about, you know, the issue of open data, you know, Dr. Ndemo, you know, you launched the Open Data Initiative at a time when, you know, all this information that was owned by government was, you know, part of the Official Secrets Act. And, you know, I read in an interview somewhere where you said, you know, there was probably a bit of pushback, but it seemed like you experienced pushback in certain areas. Did you receive support from the president, and what did that look like that enabled you to do some rather radical things that had not previously been done, hosting these information services outside the country, making data available to Kenyans? Would come from a time when getting information was just, you know, pretty difficult. Is it true that you experienced some pushback within cabinet, but what was it like then with the president?
It is true, yes. Usually there is pull and, you know, others pulling this way and the other. But what happened is that we had landed the cable, young people wanted the data to begin to develop innovative apps, and they requested that they needed some of the data, which made a lot of sense in the sense that if you wanted to develop an app to monitor the disease patterns, you need to have daily data on the people who visited hospital. So if you find that out of 1,000 patients, 800 were diarrheaing, then it's very easy to know that there is something. So we requested that the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture to provide the data and create an open data initiative. We had already started working with the Open Governance Partnership, which was started by President Obama. And the narrative globally was that governments should open public data to people to do innovations out of it.
Yeah.
So I tried to get that. There was some pushback, and that is how different the president was. He never took advice from just one person. And my boss, Mudaura, understood exactly what we wanted. And the president then called his interior minister, his vice president, Mudaura, myself. He never used to tell you what he has called you for. He would say, "Sasa sema hiyo mambo yako." So I was trying now to explain, Your Excellency, this data, we usually develop it and give it to Bretton Woods institutions. And precisely that is what planning does.
Right.
All we want is that the day you give it to the Bretton Woods, we also need it for local use. The Interior Minister was completely against. He told him this could be something like WikiLeaks. So he turned very slowly to him and said, "Sasa sema, iko shida gani kupatia sisi hii mambo yetu?" He said, "There is no problem." Then he said he's going to open that initiative. That's how we went and opened. And I've written about it saying that he could go against his senior cabinet advisors and take an argument advanced by a permanent secretary. And he settled it there and actually brought both the vice president and interior minister to the launch. There were 6,000 young people cheering. Then he was asking, "Sasa hawa umetoa wapi?" I said, "These people wanted this. This is what they wanted."
Yeah.
That was Kibaki. I mean, you couldn't go tell him quietly and say, "We can't do this." He would call the other person and ask you now, "Sema ile mambo."
Yeah, so that everybody puts it out in the open.
But this man enjoyed some special dispensation.
It would seem.
It looked like the president liked bold, courageous people. I remember because he was a member of the board. The biggest issue, I think, that confronted him was the Konsa City.
The Konsa City,
And the way he resolved it, he went beyond the bureaucracy and said, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. And he was supported. So the issue is, do you have the right intentions? Do you have the capacity and competence to make that decision? He allowed you to make it.
Okay.
And protected you.
Protected.
This one was protected always.
Yes.
And you know, on the open governance, open data initiative, because it was very key to Vision 2030, and you made it a flagship project. If I remember that particular opening day and the conversations before Dr. Ndemo was able to get it, to get it to KICC. But I think that is an illustration of the mind of the man. The way he approached running the economy, which is free market, let the market find its, the Adam Smith's free hand, is a way he managed people. He believed in creative tension, because he believed, and he made sure. And I think he had a great lieutenant in Ambassador Francis Mudaura. They made sure that they selected people who they believed in, who they thought had the talent and the capacity to manage whatever dockets they were given, whether at cabinet level, PS level, CG level, and then allowed them a free room. And President Kibaki knew that when you have all these brilliant minds, at some point in time, they will collide. And it's as long as it is constructive, creative tension, it actually yields the best results for the country. Okay. And that is why he allowed those kind of tensions before he finally showed his hand.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Was that the same for you at KRA? Because many would remember during your tenure at the time, disciplined collection, revenue, revenue jumped by, I think, 116% by the year 2005. So speak to us about a time when in this country, we had the lowest debt to GDP ratio. Revenue collection was at its highest. Many Kenyans are now not in we're not in that same space. And so we're thinking, what was the magic then?
Like I said earlier, he never interfered with what you did. He let you do your work without interference. But there were instances when people would go to him, tell him so-and-so is working, doing like this and this and this, and he would tell them, no, I know what he's doing, let him continue. There are instances when you are asked, not by his office, but by other offices, to go and meet taxpayers, to discuss taxpayers' matters. And we would say, no, taxpayers' matters are not dealt with outside KRA. Come to KRA, I have my commissioners, I have my staff, we will discuss these matters. There are instances when taxpayers would come with politicians and they wanted the favors, and we would sit down and tell the taxpayer what exactly was required of him. If it was, for example, tax evasion, we would then tell him, this is what we expect from you because of this and this and this. And more often than not, the politicians would walk away and leave us with the taxpayer, and we would collect the taxes. So he let us do our work without any interference.
KRA is obviously there's a lot of politics, at least, from the outside.
Yes.
And you talk about this in your autobiography, that there was, quite a few phone calls that you received,
yes,
from politicians at the time. So did you ever then go to the president and say, hey, mzee, ninasumbuliwa, watu wananipigia simu, people are asking, and if so, how did he handle that? Did he ever come to know about, some of the phone calls that you would receive from high-ranking political figures that you mention in your autobiography?
First of all, let me say that tax is political.
Yep.
And remember, we elect governments. Because of their program of development, because of their manifesto. In that manifesto, they say they are going to provide 1, 2, 3. By electing that government, we decide, we acknowledge we are going to finance it because there is no other source of money. But people don't expect that you are going to collect taxes from them. They expect the taxes are going to come from some other places. So when you touch them, they will be up in arms. Most of the time, they would not get audience with the president. He would not let them go there to talk about taxes. So they would usually go to the Minister of Finance. And then the Minister of Finance would refer them to me. And I think perhaps because, I don't know why, but people didn't come to me to tell me they didn't want to pay taxes. They normally cooperated. However, there are a number of people who went to some politicians who are not named, and I would get a call. Come, I want us to discuss this matter. And I would say, sorry, we can't come because taxes are not collected out there. They are collected, it's KRA that collects taxes. And then there are other people who would come, as I said earlier, with politicians wanting to be given special favors. And we would then, first of all, we needed to make sure that the taxpayer gave us authority to disclose their tax matters in presence of third parties, because again, it's the law to discuss tax matters of somebody with a third party. Once you give us that authority, then we would start disclosing, and the politician would normally just leave you. So a lot of people who came that would be left alone for us to deal with.
Did he get upset? Did he get angry? And when he did, what was he like?
He was a very guarded person. As I say, I knew him from the first time I met him. I was a young auditor in Pano Bell House, Mwangi, now Ernst & Young. He was very, very guarded. I've seen him angry. But it's very, very rare that he would show his anger. There is a time somebody got very annoyed and was jumping, and then he asked him, "Why are you so annoyed? Why are you speaking so badly and showing your anger to everybody? Do you think you are the only one who gets annoyed? Every one of us gets annoyed, but we know we don't show anger to the public." So he was guarded, and his public appearance was of a man who was in full control of himself, of his emotions, of his feelings.
And how did you know when he was happy with you, Mugo? Did he ever say, "Good job, well done, you know, that was great"? What was that like?
I think President Kibaki was a man who, as the CG has said, kept his emotions in check. After working around him for a while, after having several meetings with him, you'd get to know when he's not happy. But not because he raised his voice or banged the table or did anything like that. You'd get to know by the kind of responses, you know. When he was excited about something, he would be a bit more animated than the rest of the times. When he thought that you're not responsive, typically you'd ask questions, and he asked very few questions. And you could tell when he felt satisfied with the responses he has obtained, or when he's not satisfied. He'd ask follow-up questions. So, you know, I recall a time when the chairman here and I, and again, we'll not name names, we were having a discussion about the airport. I think you'll recall that particular discussion. The new greenfield, we wanted to build a new brand new international airport for this region as part of Vision 2030, and we felt critically that it needed to be managed a certain way. And so we made our case to the president then, and at that point in time I actually made a special request to have my chairman accompany me because it was a big discussion. And we found ourselves in sort of a fight, you know, in the cabinet room with cabinet ministers, which is highly unusual, especially for people in his private sector. I'm a Director General of Vision 2030. And of course, when that happens, you sort of demur and you lose the fight. You don't fight with cabinet ministers, right? And we went on to different topics. And about an hour of a different range of topics. And I remember the chairman, I thought we'd lost our fight. He came back and, you know, he pointed to himself and myself, and in his characteristic, with a very sly smile that he used to have, very gentle, he said, "There was an interesting discussion that you were having earlier on. Can we go back to that discussion?" And you know, that was game shot. As soon as he said that, the message was clear that he was interested in what we had to say, and he communicated to everybody else, you need to listen to what the Vision 2030 team has to say. So, but that was an hour later. So he could keep himself in check for a full hour before he reacts to a particular action, because he was, again, I keep repeating, he was a systems man, not just at the macro level, but even in the way he managed himself and managed other people.
Wow, okay. I want to talk about the banking sector with you, Dr. James. You know, Equity Bank flourished at that time, but he also came in at a time, you know, there was skyrocketing interest rates in the country, and access to credit suddenly boomed. And Dr. Bitangi will correct me if I'm wrong. This was the time we saw the growth, you know, in the cities of exhibition stalls and, you know, malls with all of these shops. And suddenly people were going to Turkey and going to China and, you know, bringing clothing and all other, you know, equipment to sell. And many say that this was the beginning of increased access to credit for many who'd been locked out of what was the then traditional banking system. To what do you attribute that, particularly, you know, under the president's tenure?
I think you just need to look at the numbers, and it's incredibly refreshing. When he assumed power in 2002, the total entire banking industry had a balance sheet of only 457 billion. By the time he left, we were slightly over 2.03 trillion. That is how fast but it's the number of people who were banked. We moved from less than a million to 20 million. And that is what really transformed this economy, because if you look at credit, the entire credit to the banking industry was barely 200 billion shillings when he came into power. And by the time he left, we were slightly over $1 trillion. So the economy, in one way or another, got a huge support from the banking industry. There was a lot of oxygen that was being pushed to really stimulate economic activities. And that is then how we developed an economy that was broad-based, because we gave everybody an opportunity. So to me, the biggest industries that developed was the financial sector was the first one, and it grew exponentially. But because it was a system structurally driven, even after its exit, now we are talking about 6.5 trillion. The industry continued to grow. We're talking of over now 30 million customers. But it is the ability to distribute credit, it's the ability to allocate resources to ideas that really transformed. If you look at when the Nairobi Stock Exchange, when they ascended to power, the entire market capitalization of Nairobi Stock Exchange was only 89 billion. He left it when it was right over $1 trillion shillings. So, and now $1 trillion shillings is even less than the market cap of one company. That is the dynamics of the market. So to me, he transformed the economy by making the market to function, and to function in a way that were not interfered with. That is why the banks as the intermediators in the marketplace, taking from those who have excess and giving to those who have deficit. In an environment where you can predict inflation, predict interest rate, and predict exchange rate. That is why the economy has flourished.
So there's all of these moments, and there was the first and the second term. And, you know, I just want to get into...
He can't blow his trumpet because he was very innovative. Actually, equity grew fastest in that period with very innovative products, which covered areas where other international banks had moved from. That is true.
Yeah, I think we got a license to really make finance inclusive. People say we democratized finance, but truly we disrupted the finance, and it's no longer the same.
Is there a reason that was not possible before President Kibaki took over? And, you know, to what of his effort or, you know, policy?
The environment.
It is a policy environment. He enabled the markets. Before that market were constrained by policy. Sorry.
I think, I know, just, not sure, but just to remember the growth of banks, you know, and I always have a bit of a tiff with bankers and lawyers. The growth of banks is the bank of the rest of the economy. The rest of the economy cannot do without an efficient banking system. And the vice versa is true. So, you know, just harking back to my earlier days, pre-Vision 2030 days, when I came into the country to run a very small little company called East African Cables, which grew significantly. What we're talking about here, in terms of the banking sector growing and the space to operate being afforded by the president then, it traversed the entire economy. And so a small company like East African Cables grew its revenues sixfold in 4 years, not because of anything special about the team that was at East African Cables in 2004, 2005. It's because the space was fresh. Nobody ever called me. Prior to that, and I'll go directly to your question, what was different? I can assure you that if a company grew sixfold in 4 years, it was highly unlikely that they would not have received a call from some senior state actors asking for one thing or another or else. I never had a call like that in my entire time as a CEO of East African Cables. And that, again, was coincident with the growth of companies like Equity Bank, Safaricom. It was the entire economy. And he, more than doing something to make the market work, he allowed the market to do its thing and only intervened if he felt that the market needed to be corrected. Some intervention needed to correct the market.
If you want to attribute that to the president, he had gone to Nyeri and the people wanted money. He said, "Nendeni kwa banki muchukue." Actually, when he was saying that, government was not competing with the citizens with respect to borrowing. The banks found an environment that was conducive for them to actually flourish.
Yeah.
And when he said uende kwa bank na muchukue, he then said na kuchukua mukumbuke kulipa.
Exactly.
You know, that was the exact phrase, and that is how during that time Equity grew tenfold every 5 years and sustained that momentum for 20 years.
Okay,
I was just going to say, and again without blowing my trumpet, because KRA was meeting its target and therefore financing government, the need for government to go to the banks for borrowing was not there. So there was money available for the rest of the economy, and therefore everybody, in fact, even the Mama Boga could open an account. And then, of course, there are banks like Equity Bank, which came in at that time, which, like you used the word democratized. Anybody could. In fact, why you were calling them member.
Yes.
Welcome member. Everybody was a member, was welcome to be a member.
You call a Nemo member.
Yes. Yes. And therefore, they had facilities available, and anybody could join, irrespective of the deposit, the amount of money you are putting there. Before that, I used to be in charge of bank audits in Ernst & Young, and I remember the banking saying you will not have run a bank account in our bank unless you are maintaining these deposits. It's Equity Bank.
Locked.
Which removed that because they came and said you do not have to have minimum balance.
Minimum balance. Okay. So, you know, there was great economic growth, but then there are some instances, obviously, gentlemen, that took us a step back in this country. Now, I know none of you were on the political front at the time, but I just want to hear from you about some of the instances that were a blight on the country's record at the time. So one of them, and perhaps I'll start with you, Dr. Bitange Ndemo, is collections were good, as we're hearing, and so, you know, the government wasn't borrowing from the local market, but then there were also instances of corruption, and that is something that, you know, we cannot run away from. The president himself may not have been implicated, but there were huge scandals. I mean, there was Anglo leasing and the like. I wonder what your thoughts are around, you know, the corruption at this time and how that was handled and, you know, the manner in which it affected the economic progress of the country.
I think, generally, you need to, I'm a big data evangelist. Many of these mega corruptions used to happen at the very beginning of the term, and it is very true to say that those who fund elections try to recover what they funded to politicians at the very beginning. If you recall, after the Anglo leasing, I think the economy went on to be very well. I mean, initially there was at the beginning, and the same thing happened even during Moi's time. It is something that we need to be aware of. And I think the funding of elections was created as a result of having those cycles where people take advantage, or businessmen take advantage of funding government and then demanding to recover that at the initial stages of the new government. Yeah. What
of you know, the very grave moment of the post-election violence, 2007, 2008. You know, what were your thoughts? I would like to hear from you, Michael. You know, where were you? What were your thoughts around that time? An economy that was growing, it was on a trajectory, we were getting there, and then, of course, that happens, great loss of life, and also a great setback to the economy and our ability to collect revenue. What were your thoughts around that time?
It's probably the saddest moment for me and for most Kenyans, after so many years of having elections with minimum violence, that people would lose I think it was more than 1,300 people lost their lives because of elections. It was needless. It could, in my view, have been avoided. Unfortunately, it happened. There are, in my view, failures by various organs of government. I think had some of those organs of government taken action, maybe they would have been avoided. But it happened. I hope it will never have to have it again. I was sitting in KRA, as I see it, there was the saddest moment for me.
You know,
Mogo?
You know, interestingly, that clearly for me is perhaps the biggest blot in an otherwise remarkable career. And I think it cannot be gainsaid. That was a low moment, even for President Kibaki. But interestingly for me, that was the first time that I actually ever met President Kibaki, face-to-face in a private meeting. I mean, I'd met him in sort of public fora, shaking his hand, but that doesn't count. But in terms of having a sit-down and having a discussion that was serious, at the time when a few private sector leaders were keen to go and see the president, and that was long before Kofi Annan came, at the beginning, at the height of the crisis. We felt a lot of CEOs, and I'm sure, you know, those of you who are running institutions, were seeing things that a lot of Kenyans were not. You know, I had to experience, you know, to maneuver people, transfer people from different areas of the country because they were the wrong. Their tribe was politically incorrect for that particular region across the country. Yeah. Those were whole systems we were doing, and a lot of CEOs were undertaking that. I had people come and tell me that they've just found, you know, grisly stuff outside their doorsteps. And so we felt strongly we needed to go and send a message because we felt this aloof president, this is long before I knew who he was, this aloof man has no idea what's going on, and they were going to bypass the hardliners, get to him. And when we went to see him, a tough meeting it was. He was clearly not aloof, clearly knew what was going on. That was one thing we discovered. The second thing was he was running the show. But he had his reasons for feeling aggrieved. In fact, just as Michael said, one of the comments he made is that we were doing so well, we were at 7%, and that year was projected to be a 3% growth. So there are those who say that he was very good economically, but maybe not so politically. We cannot all be great at everything. But clearly that was a low moment. I think the fact that we saw an end to it where he sort of sat down with his opponent and they came to an agreement where they both put the country first, sort of retrieved some of the dignity that had been lost. I also think, and I've said this, when I was in Vision 2030, I used to go out internationally and tell people, if you want a country to invest in, Kenya is the country. Why? Because at our lowest moment, in the middle of one of the worst crises Kenya has ever seen, long before Kofi Annan came along, we had a session of parliament where the warring forces came together, sat down, elected a speaker, followed a swearing-in ceremony, and the head of state sat there and withstood tremendous insults, and Kenya moved on. And after the agreement between the two gentlemen, actually the next 5 years were actually the years when Vision 2030 was put in place. Yeah. So in terms of my reflections, it just happens to coincidentally to be that I met him through that particular incident. But again, just to conclude, it was also a testament to the system he put up that a year later, he still came to pick me as the CEO of Vision 2030, despite the kind of engagement we had at the height of the crisis. He never took anything personal at all. He had friends such as Michael here, friends for long, who were working for him. He had people like me who were younger and had never met him before he joined government. But when we met in, working for him, you never tell the difference. He never favored anybody. You carried your own cross, and he gave you room to operate because of your own professionalism.
I want us to get into a round of closing comments now, and I'll start on this end because we've, heard from you about the man that he was, and talked about the economics at the time over his 10-year administration. And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Ndemo, and perhaps even as you close, talk to us about the culture of transition in this country. And by that I mean moving from, one administration to the next. And in terms of handing over the baton and making sure that, what is started is finished. What lessons do we need to learn to make sure that, Vision 2030 is met? We now have 8 years to the conclusion of that. Konza, many people will say it started off with promise, but we're not seeing as much accelerated activity as we had hoped, amongst many others, because now we're looking at the transition of a man, but it's also, I guess, a good time to look at the transition of policy and of ideas. What do you think we can learn from that as we reflect?
I still say that we probably would never have another person like Kibaki. I mean, I'll be proven wrong, but we would never have somebody like that. Even at the height of the crisis, when some ministers were saying close down the telecoms, he actually said "apana" when he was told that there are people in the forest calling to be helped. He said "apana fanya hiyo." Most African countries shut down their systems, internet, everything. But more importantly, it was his direct intervention, because in government, there are two kinds of people. There are the people who want to work, and there are what I call mandarins who want to deviate things. We had some setbacks, by the way. One thing that he wanted to see is young people get jobs. For example, when we wanted to get Samia Park, we had gotten 2,000 jobs out of Europe, engineering jobs, 10,000 out of India, and we wanted to rent that space. We found some mandarins who wanted to benefit and pushed us all the kinds of things. We couldn't do it. So sometimes it gets to a point that you don't want to go back for the president for protection. He had said when IBM president came, said, we want to build something. That's how Konza started. Big, huge space. We do 10,000 back office because that is what they were trying to do. Konza isn't dead. What happened is that the Constitution came, and then we had something called National Land Commission. They did not understand that their role was to enable. What they started was to implement and saying that you can't give land to foreigners. And the thinking was that we would lease land to these foreigners. The Koreans would have finished. The Korean Institute of Advanced Institute for Science and Technology, they have started the foundation now. It was going to come with several mobile phone manufacturers and other things. Yeah. Several people actually moved because of frustration of bureaucracy in government. Government is bureaucratic. And the benefit we had in Kibaki, he would say, kwenda fanya tuone ni nani atauliza. Then you actually go with a lot of this packing. He packed you up because you went to ask for that permission. Yeah. Even those who are coming. 2002, we had a smooth transition because Uhuru accepted defeat and said, I accept defeat, and it was very smooth. If all the leaders can first accept that I am not number one, the rest now we can sort out in court, we would have smooth transitions going forward, if that is the question you are asking. But we pray that we get to that maturity that we had in 2002 going forward. Okay. But again, I repeat, it's going to be very difficult to get somebody like Kibaki again.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Dr. James Mwangi, your final thoughts on the legacy of President Kibaki and where we go. Everybody is talking about the economy now, including the politicians. We're just about 3 months away to an election, and suddenly you start to hear lots of people saying, let's revive our economy like it was, under Kibaki, at the time. So what are your final reflections?
I think on final reflections, maybe one thing that has not been fully appreciated was the governance structure. Vision 2030 had 4 planks. The first was economy. The president really prioritized. Then to make sure that he got it right, he prioritized on the enablers, that's all the infrastructure to support and make the economy take off. And then he had empathy towards Kenyans. Then he took the social pillar, that is health, education, housing. Essentially, one pillar took too long to be enacted, and that is the governance structure, which then eventually gave us the new constitutional framework and governance structure. Mm-hmm. And if you look, and I rightly said, when transition became a challenge in 2017, and we had repeat elections, it's simply because the governance structures had been put in place. And so while I really appreciate what we have gone through, I think the future will reflect more of the institutional capability and the structures that have been put of dealing with governance issues. So I see as if transitions will be better. We now have an integrated, balanced development framework that looks at economy, that looks at social, but also looks at governance. I'm seeing as if the institutions that deal with items like corruption and all that, we are starting now to see them develop teeth and bite, whether it's the recovery. Or the other thing. So essentially, it's that delay, and maybe it was passion for economy that caused us to delay one of the cogs that eventually would have saved the economy of all the challenges that we went through during the last 20 years. Okay. So I'm confident that he has left us with a foundation that truly we can continue to build on. And as maybe Dr. Demo said, when we look at the Vision 2030 framework, like the current government has talked of the big 4, but just they have picked 4 items from Vision 2030. That's simply implementing the Vision 2030. So essentially the fact that the country has a plan, the country has a long-term strategic plan, then we can build on each other. And consequently, hopefully, the cumulative effect and the compounded impact on building on each other's effort will see this country go very far.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mangi. Michael, you oversaw KRA when it was meeting targets, surpassing the same, when we were dependent on our own revenue. You know, to a large extent, there was still, of course, you know, a debt portfolio. Yes. That is not the same today, and Kenyans are saying, you know, we are not collecting as much as we should. We have a big debt portfolio. Where do you think we go from here as a country?
First of all, I think debt is not bad if you are going to be able to pay it, and if you are using it for productive purposes. Debt is bad if it is going to be misallocated, if it's going to be stolen, if it's going to be misused. Then you will be paying for something which was never really used for the public good. Now, but or you can only justify debt if you are going to be able to raise enough money in the future, if it's going to be used to develop structures and systems and structure that will enable business to contribute to the economy so that the economy grows. Now, is that the case? I do not know. But I do know that Kenyans are complaining about debt, and actually several projects have stalled because of the complaint of Kenyans about debt. I used to be chairman of Kenya Railways, and we were building the railway. Then, because of Kenyans complaining, it has not reached where it was supposed to reach. So the section from Nairobi to
Naivasha.
Yeah, to whatever.
Naivasha. To Naivasha?
Naivasha.
Yes.
It's not being used by anybody. It's lying idle because of a complaint. Now, we should have, in my view, borrowed to complete it all the way to Kisumu, so that then the railway would be used throughout the route it was supposed to follow. Yeah. In my view, I think Kenyans need to be educated to understand why we are borrowing, and then when we borrow, we use it for the purpose. I do not think any evidence has been adduced to show that the debt was badly used. It is the misinformation, in my view, to Kenyans that stopped this, and therefore we have a project that could be regarded as a white elephant up to now. So I would urge Kenyans, before they start saying this is, to have evidence to show, yes, this is being stolen, this is being misallocated, because then we will not have projects that are going to be of use.
What will you remember most about your friend whom you say you met back in 1979?
I remember President Kibaki is a very gentle person, is a very understanding person, is a very intelligent, I want to repeat that, very intelligent person of greatest integrity. I do not think anybody can point a finger at President Kibaki, late President Kibaki, about anything to do with misallocation or corruption. I do not think so. So he is, in my view, my role model. He is a person I would like to copy. I would like to be like him in whatever I do.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mugo, you get the honor of going last. Vision 2030 comes to an end 8 years from now. What would the president in the year 2030 think of doing? Do we then say it's Vision 2030 2.0 and give it another, in terms of vision, because a lot of, we've said around this table, quite a bit of what we're seeing in terms of infrastructure, roads, waterways, airports, and many other projects were as a result of Vision 2030. So where do we go from here? When it's all said and done, what are the lessons from the tenure of President Kibaki, and what happens to the person who's taking over now and in the years to come?
Thank you, Yvonne. First of all, I think that when you set a particular strategy and a goal and an objective, I think you should see it to the end. So we are 8 years to the end of Vision 2030, and we have to redouble our efforts if that's what it takes, and not start second-guessing ourselves. Clearly, as we approach 2030, we don't have to wait for 2030, we must start thinking about the Kenya of 2050, 2060, what we want that Kenya to look like, and we must start planning for that as we approach the year 2030. But in the meantime, we have to make sure that we achieve our goals on 2030. As far as the late President Kibaki is concerned and his legacy, I would just compartmentalize it into two components. One is his constant and consistent message to the people of Kenya in terms of attitude and morality. One of his most frequent phrases, and it sounded sort of playful, but it was very serious and deep, whenever he said, kila mtu mwende mfanye kazi. Philosophically, he was a firm believer that you don't reap where you have not sown. You must work, you must add value to yourself, to your family, to your community, to the country, to the world. But he always accompanied that statement with, alafu mwende mujienjoy. Now, that may sound unrelated. What he meant, in my view, was enjoy the fruits of your own labor, not other people's. Go and work, add value, and what your just desserts are, and no one can take that away from you. Enjoy it with your family. Philosophically, he believed that's a message as a father figure he was sending to all of us. Many of us did not get it, because if we did, there'd be less corruption. The question that you asked Professor Ndemu, because why would you take why you have added no value? Because you're taking away from somebody else's hard work. And the second component would be what I've said from the very beginning. He firmly believed in institutions and systems. And coming from him, this was a superstar from his earliest days in high school. Straight A's in Mangu, top of his class in Makerere,
London's
first class honors at the LSE, first African, double first class honors at the LSE, super finance minister under Jomo Kenyatta. And yet, you would think that a man like that would believe in his doing things by himself. Yet what that intellect and his experience taught him and told me is that we actually need everybody's brain. And therefore, that can only be harnessed through systems and institutions. So if I was to come back to your question, what would he say in 2030? Yeah, not everything that he thought would be accomplished will have been, but the foundations he laid in institutions and systems are what we are thriving on. It is why we're able to build the expressway, because he created Kenya National Highway Authority to give direct accountability to highways. The Constitution that finally he had the honor of promulgating. It's difficult, tough, fits and starts, but it is what took us through 2017, because an independent judiciary had been created to that Constitution, systems and institutions which all of us accepted, including the most powerful in the land. So I think he would say that his belief in systems and institutions has been proven right, and his also other belief that you should work and reap where you sow also has been, is justified.
I think we can't go without finishing that we are actually going to get into the middle income. And Mwangi can agree with me that the level of productivity improvement out of the investments in the ICT sector is unprecedented. I mean, the costs are going down, the margins are improving in the private sector. This is going into creating more jobs in this sector. MSMEs are going to be disrupted very significantly because of the ICTs. The banking sector, you are going to see them trying to disrupt where there is the greatest problem, micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Absolutely.
And that would open up.
I think he found us with our GDP per capita of only 27,000 shillings. That is, if we divided the wealth of the country, each of us could only get 27. We're now headed to 240,000. So truly, we are low income. And so in the next 8 years, I've no doubt we'll truly become a middle income country. But the question is, the vision was a means, not the end. So as Mugo said, then we need to dream, how do we move from a middle income economy to a high income economy? And I think we have the roadmap, we have the structures, we have the systems. I think it's for Kenyans, we all take our role and make it happen.
Like was said, to fanye kazi. And then after that, to enjoy. I want us to take a look at some of the feedback that we have, and some of them are in the form of questions. I don't know that we have the time to answer, but we will try. This is from Mwema Wambua, who says, how did President Kibaki's facing East foreign policy orientation, especially Sino-Kenya relations, impact on the economy and infrastructure? Does anyone want to take that real quick? And then the rest we can get our comments, because it's a 11:15.
If I take that one, because it was so central in financing. President Kibaki came at a time when Africa had been abandoned by the West. So it was more of creating an alternative, and the East was ready. Essentially, what that did was to make the West to come back. And now we have a choice of the World Bank, we have the West, and we have the East. And essentially, we are now treated with honor and dignity as we borrow.
So there we go. And there are, quite a few questions that are here, some of which I think, we already answered. So let's take a look at a comment here from Brian. He says, I'm very proud of that panel. Today, Kenyans are enjoying fast internet, doing a lot of innovation, courtesy of Bitangi and Demo and the crew. Kibaki will remain in our thoughts for long. We have another one. I guess I saw a couple of others on my Twitter handle as well. Chariot says Equity took the banking services from the high streets to the alleys and the back streets. Mamambogas would walk with their kiondos to the polished banking halls, mingling with gents with briefcases in queues. And then there's another one from Walenisi, 45, says, Mugo Kibaki has put it very well. After working, ambia mwili pole pia.
Kibaki believed that.
Kibaki believed that. There you go. Then here's another one from Stephen Ndubi. Says, this is a very informative interview. This is what we need. The fathers of Vision 2030 need to be interviewed more. Bitange Ndemo's hopes and prayers for maturity. That was in 2002. Those are prayers we all share. Oringe Waswa Bonaparte says, very interesting discussion by the IT guru, Dr. Ndemo, former KRA Commissioner General Michael Wawere, and Telkom boss Mugo Kibati, and he calls you a mogul, James Mwangi, on the economic legacy during the third president's tenure. Serious brains, he says. And then there's definitely more, and I think this one we answered already, from Ogeke Araka, who says, seems there's a huge concession that President Kibaki's rule outshines all. The tragedy, however, is that over 60 years, Project Kenya continues to be dogged by ethnicity, corruption, and lack of nationalism. Kindly ask your panel to comment. I think we can take this one, maybe just one very quick round on that. You know, ethnicity, corruption, lack of nationalism. Dr. Bitange Ndemo, do you want to comment on that?
I think those, I tend to, because I am now teaching younger people,
yeah.
Like the students, when you, these young people don't see themselves as tribalists. Amazing thing is that it doesn't matter, and they are the majority. And if this continued, you are going to have a totally different population. I don't talk politics, but if you see the voting in Kiamba, those people who are voting the way they voted, they had no ethnic affiliation completely. I mean, because they have grown up in a different age. I don't know, yeah. Mugo, you can help me, please?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I've always found tribalism as a red herring that is really promulgated by political leaders. And it's about what works for an individual, for a citizen. If a citizen finds, you know, strength and succor in their community, that's what they will promote. If they find it in institutions of state, they'll become more nationalist. Again, going to President Kibaki, that was his dream. His dream was that you don't have to do harambes when you need to go to hospital, because then you go to your community, and that entrenches tribalism. His dream was that you have universal health care, you depend on the state,
yeah.
You have decent public sector education, so you don't depend on your community, you kill tribalism. You know, if you look at what's happening in other parts of the world, in the US, we have tribalism that has grown over the last 5 years tremendously, with the Republican Party completely abandoning reason because of community. So my view is that nationalism is something that we have to work towards by making people rely on their state. Find something in their state, the taxes that Michael used to collect. When they go to the social pillar, for instance, and the social pillar of vision is very, very important in building nationhood. Not just the political pillar.
They'll find adequate, affordable housing.
Yeah, the political pillar gives you the structures of governance.
Yeah.
But it is a social pillar. If people have affordable health care, I can take my daughter, no matter, you know, my job or my salary, to hospital, to a good school, and I can put a decent plate of food on the table. Very soon, you get more patriotic, more nationalistic people, and more of our leaders in politics needs to focus on that.
Absolutely.
If I could just add,
yes.
I think we need to ask Kenyans to be more lenient in judging the country. We are a young country. We are still developing. We've come from rural areas, from those areas, and we met here, and we are working together. If we continue talking about tribalism, we foster it, we make it grow. I think we need to be more positive in looking at the country and talking more positive about the achievements of the country and its people. There are very many achievements that we need to talk about and publicize instead of being negative about the country.
Indeed, I think that's a good place to leave it. I want to read.
But maybe
yes.
we could have added, once we overcome the basic challenges of life, the very basic, then we'll start developing our esteem and pride as a people. And it's only then that people embrace and adopt national value systems. And it's when their allegiance is to the state and is to their country, because the country has helped them to be at a certain level of quality of life.
Physiological needs taken care of.
National value systems become a valued and shared system of relating.
And which is why, Yvonne, we need to ensure that the holistic, integrated approach that President Kibaki envisioned in Vision 2030, not discrete implementation of projects, but the holistic vision, because they're all interconnected, will lead us eventually to nationhood and patriotism.
Indeed. You know, gentlemen, we could talk here for another 2 hours, and we're getting into, you know, a really interesting part of the conversation. 2 last tweets. Alexi Wandaho says, I'm really enjoying this interview. Winnie Kabinti says, great conversation, awesome interview. I've enjoyed going down memory lane. Gentlemen, we cannot thank you enough for making the time. It is very rare that we get to bring together gentlemen like this of your caliber. Hopefully we can do this under better, different circumstances. You know, when it's not mourning the death of an important person in this country, but also grateful that his passing has enabled us to meet and congregate in this manner and to start to think about you know, what is really important for us as a country. And for that, I thank you on behalf of Royal Media Services, of Citizen TV, and indeed of the viewers who have watched the show tonight. We thank you for your time, and thank you for continuing to reflect, and also condole with you on the loss of somebody that you all knew very well on a personal level. So, you know, as we say in Kiswahili, tuwe pole sote. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program tonight. That is where we leave it here on Newsnight, but do not forget that our continued coverage of the final journey of the third President of the Republic of Kenya, President Mwai Kibaki, continues. The last day of him lying in state is tomorrow, that's Wednesday. And of course, all eyes will be in Othaya on Friday and Saturday. And you can trust Citizen Television to continue to give you live, wall-to-wall, unparalleled coverage of the man. And of course, taking a look at his legacy and where we go from here as a country. Thank you very much for watching Newsnight tonight. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Good night. We'll see you again on Thursday. Bye-bye.